Introduced. My name is Tony Kearns. I'm the Senior Deputy General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union. Interesting point Hillary made about the use of information technology and new forms of communication. Communication Workers Union, we represent workers in Roma, BT predominantly. That's the sector that we operate in. It wasn't me that you were meant to get speaking to you today. It was going to be Manuel Cortez. No complaint, by the way. I'm happy to come along. Manuel Cortez is the General Secretary of the Transport Salary Staff Association. And I think the idea of getting into the debate was because at this year's TUC Congress there was a motion, probably the most radical motion that has been on climate change debated at TUC since I've been in my lifetime. It was moved by Transport Salary Staff Association and seconded by me on behalf of the Communication Workers Union. And it majored on just transition, but it argued also for a number of other points, not least of which about basically opposition to airport expansion, and it was against the background of the environment and climate and the state that the planet is in, and trying to find alternative ways of working for workers, arising out of the 1 million climate jobs pamphlet. And Susan Jeffrey she's here in the room at the moment, but is coming to speak later on at one of the workshops on that. And just on that, I had a very small part, not overstating, a small part in the production of the 1 million climate jobs. The original one, the CWU supported the production of that, along with other people who sitting over there, Remain, and is it Phil? From Campaigning Against Climate Change Trade Union Group. And the reason that's, for me, the reason that we think that's important is because if you follow, if you like, the sense of direction that the Lucas plan threw up, particularly this idea of production of what is socially useful, then in a planet or an environment that, unless something rapidly changes, is going to cause major problems in the world in terms of food production and in terms of the way everybody lives on this planet going forward, then workers have to play a part in that, as far as I can see. But the debate at the TUC Congress, and don't worry, this isn't a speech, but this is the verbatim report of what happened at the TUC. And the motion was opposed by the General Counsel of the TUC. I used to sit on the General Counsel of the TUC, not anymore. This is their policy, I'm not too bothered about that. But the motion called for a rapid transition from fossil fuels, and the TUC General Counsel opposed that particular point. Right? We don't want a rapid transition from fossil fuels. Now, I was a bit like bemused about why you would want that. What struck me about that, and I think this is another lesson, if you like, that I think we should take from the Lucas plan, is that what certain trade unionists and certain trade unions trying to do here is sort of reinvent the past. Trying to replace what's gone in the past, but sort of use that as the model for the future. And I think that that's starting from like the wrong end of the telescope. It's looking at from the wrong end of the telescope. Not to look for the past, but to look at where we're going to be in the future as a society, where we're going to be in the future. And this goes back to the point about designing products that are socially useful, and at the same time going to chase saving the planet, and therefore saving both of the people on the planet. Because not wishing to be doom and gloom, but I don't think anyone read Monreal's latest article this week. And depressingly, I shared his view that at some point in my lifetime, which I never thought was going to happen until the last 12 months. I see the major powers on this planet involved engaging each other in some kind of war. Now, there's been constant wars on this planet since the end of the Second World War. And when I say war, I don't mean isolation. I don't mean isolation. I thought the microphone's on. I don't mean isolationist wars that we've seen at this point, up to this point on this planet. I see major wars on the planet going forward, but based around natural resources. Because you look at what's happening in Africa, and the droughts that have happened in Africa. And we're seeing a migration in Africa away from, so Japan, for example, has bought up large agricultural areas in Africa. And what's happened is small farmers have shipped out of their agricultural generations of a home base, moved to cities where they find them nowhere, and are migrating north to the Mediterranean areas. And they're migrating north to an area where there's war going on, and so they're migrating even further north to the Mediterranean and trying to find a way to the European continent. Some of that has been caused by wars in the Middle East, but some of that has been caused by climate change. Yeah? And that's only going to get worse on this planet unless we find a different way. Right? And there will be a battle for resources. I was having this discussion with people about the ideological battles of one superpower against another's ideological position. I don't think that's coming. I think there's a real risk on this planet of major wars over battles for resources. 30% of all agricultural production in America is dependent on 3 underground reservoirs, what do you call it? I don't remember the exact technical term for where they get that water from. And they're going to run out of water in the next 10 to 20 years. So when the biggest hub on the planet, right, arguably, the American military, suddenly finds it's residing over a population where 30% of its agricultural production is going to fail in 20 years, they're not going to stand for that position. They're going to try and replace that agricultural production by getting that food from somewhere else in the world. It currently belongs to somewhere else in the world, but that ain't going to stop the superpower demanding that it's theirs, and they'll do it by might. Yeah? So I share Monbiot's doom. I don't always agree with everything Monbiot says, so I share Monbiot's doom and gloom on this. But that's where we're headed. That's where we're headed, unless we do something different. And doing something different is doing what the Lucas plan did. And that questions the world we live in, right? And you can't escape the fact that if you want to leave as a legacy, and you know, there are a number of things as a trade union. One of the depressing things I know as a trade unionist is that since the Industrial Revolution, the generation that's coming after my generation, I've been in work for 40 years now, the generation that's following the younger generation, for one of better phrase, is going to be the first generation since the Industrial Revolution that is economically poorer than the generation that went before. It's not a legacy that I'm particularly proud that somehow I was involved in at that part in time, but it's also the generation that's going to leave or contribute to a planet that's dying. Yeah? And so not only economically is the generation that come behind is going to be poorer than the ones that went before, but they're not going to be able to survive either, because there's going to be a limited resource. And the limited resource is going to be, we're going to try and grab that limited resource, we're going to try and grab by the big powers, but backed by the big multinational corporations. And that's where the direction we're headed. So coming up with alternatives for workers, right, for me, is about questioning the world we live in. It's about changing the world we live in. It's about saying that the things that we want in future are not the things we have in the past. And I think that's the problem with the trade union movement. So, I accept the point, even as a senior official of the trade union, I accept the point that it's not going to change from the top down. That's evidenced by the big unions who spoke against that motion at the Tuesday conference this year. It might be a small thing in terms of what's happening in this country, but it's symbolic to me of the attitude generally in the trade union movement, because the political direction of the trade union movement on this particular subject is really dictated by a handful of individuals. I'm prepared to have that argument with anybody about climate and the role workers play. So I'm going to go to Unite, and I'm going to go to the GMB, and I'm going to go to some of those other unions who voted against this and have that discussion with them. But it should be left to the faith, if you like, or the belief of individuals. It has to come from the bottom up. This is the point that the Lucas plan always says to me. It's got to come from the bottom up. That means everybody in this room who's in a trade union, go back into their trade union, go into their branch meetings. If you're not a representative at some level, become a representative at some level, and make this argument in the trade union movement and bring it from the bottom up to tell your trade union that we need a different society. We need a better world, because the resources of the planet are running out and are going to be grabbed by big countries and big corporations, and the rest of the planet can go to hell. That's the reality of what we face, and the power to change that is in your hands. It's partly in my hands, but it's in your hands. So go out and join a trade union if you're not in one, and if you don't want to take this argument to grassroots level of trade union and build that momentum from the bottom up, and to say we need a different society. The evidence is there why we need a different society. It's got to come from the bottom up, and it also has to come with democratic control. That once we change society, that we're in control of that future, and not the people who've led us to this point now, which is on the brink of disaster. And that's what I think the debate should be about the role of the trade union movement in this whole debate. Thank you.